Hello and welcome to English Language and Literature. Today, we will be discussing the summary of the play Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. Act 1 of William Shakespeare's play Much Ado About Nothing introduces the characters and sets the scene for the plot to unfold. Here is a summary of Act 1, along with some of its most famous dialogues. The play is set in the city of Messina, Italy, and begins with the arrival of Don Pedro, Prince of Aragon, and his entourage at the house of Leonato, governor of Messina. Don Pedro has just returned from a successful military campaign and is accompanied by two of his officers, Claudio and Benedick. Claudio is a young soldier who has recently distinguished himself in battle, while Benedick is a witty and sarcastic bachelor who enjoys mocking love and marriage. One of the first conversations in Act 1 takes place between Benedick and Beatrice, Leonato's niece. Beatrice is a strong-willed and outspoken woman who engages in a war of words with Benedick, who teases her about her unmarried status. This exchange includes one of the play's most famous lines, when Benedick says to Beatrice, "I would my horse had the speed of your tongue." Meanwhile, Claudio falls in love with Leonato's daughter, Hero, and seeks Don Pedro's help in wooing her. Don Pedro agrees to assist him and arranges for a masked ball to be held that night, where Claudio can dance with Hero and express his feelings. At the ball, Don Pedro's bastard brother, Don John, and his associates attempt to cause trouble by tricking Claudio into believing that Don Pedro intends to woo Hero for himself. Claudio becomes jealous and angry, but ultimately learns the truth and reconciles with Don Pedro. As the night progresses, Benedick and Beatrice continue to trade barbs, and eventually Benedick admits to himself that he is in love with her. This realization leads to another famous line, when Benedick says, "When I said I would die a bachelor, I did not think I should live till I were married." Act 1 ends with the promise of more romance and drama to come, as Claudio prepares to ask Leonato for permission to marry Hero, and Benedick and Beatrice begin to acknowledge their feelings for each other. Overall, Act 1 of Much Ado About Nothing sets the stage for a light-hearted and witty romantic comedy, with plenty of memorable characters and dialogue to entertain audiences. Act 2 of William Shakespeare's play, Much Ado About Nothing, builds on the romantic intrigue and comic misunderstandings introduced in Act 1. Here is a summary of Act 2, along with some of its most famous dialogues. The act begins with Don John plotting to ruin the happiness of Claudio and Hero. He enlists the help of his henchmen, Beracchio and Conrad, to stage a fake encounter between Beracchio and Margaret, a servant in Hero's household. They plan to make it appear as though Hero is being unfaithful to Claudio, thereby ruining her reputation and preventing their marriage. Meanwhile, Benedick continues to struggle with his feelings for Beatrice, while she engages in a witty exchange with a masked man at the masked ball. Unbeknownst to her, the masked man is actually Benedick, who has disguised himself in order to overhear her true feelings about him. This scene includes another famous line, when Beatrice says of Benedick, "He wears his faith, but as the fashion of his hat, it ever changes with the next block." The next day, Don Pedro, Claudio, and Leonato stage a conversation within earshot of Benedick, in which they discuss how much Beatrice is in love with Benedick, hoping to prompt him into confessing his feelings. Their plan works, and Benedick reveals to himself that he is indeed in love with Beatrice. However, the plot to ruin Hero's reputation goes ahead as planned. Claudio is led to believe that he has witnessed Hero being unfaithful, and he publicly shames her at the altar on their wedding day. This leads to a dramatic confrontation between Leonato and Claudio, and the revelation of the truth behind the plot against Hero. Act 2 ends on a cliffhanger, with Hero fainting from the shock of the events and being presumed dead. The stage is set for a dramatic resolution to the conflicts and misunderstandings that have been building throughout the play. Overall, Act 2 of Much Ado About Nothing is a pivotal point in the play's plot, introducing new elements of drama and tension alongside the witty banter and romantic entanglements that have become hallmarks of the play. Act 3 of William Shakespeare's play, Much Ado About Nothing, is a turning point in the play's plot, as the various conflicts and misunderstandings are resolved and the characters begin to find happiness. Here is a summary of Act 3, along with some of its most famous dialogues. The act opens with the discovery that Hero is not, in fact, dead, but rather was pretending to be so in order to escape the shame of Claudio's accusations. Friar Francis, who had helped orchestrate the plan, reveals the truth to Leonato and proposes a plan to clear Hero's name and restore her reputation. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Benedick continue to struggle with their feelings for each other. They each confess their love to a disguised Friar Francis, who encourages them to express their feelings to each other. This scene includes the famous line, when Benedick says of Beatrice, "I do love nothing in the world so well as you." The plan to clear Hero's name involves a staged scene in which Claudio is convinced that he was mistaken and that Hero is innocent. He agrees to marry her and restore her reputation, and the play ends with a joyous celebration of their wedding. Throughout Act 3, there are several moments of light-hearted comedy and witty banter. One example is when Dogberry, the constable, attempts to report on the events surrounding Hero's accusation, but his bumbling incompetence leads to confusion and hilarity. This scene includes the famous line, when Dogberry says, "Comparisons are odorous." Overall, Act 3 of Much Ado About Nothing brings the various plot threads to a satisfying conclusion, with the resolution of conflicts and the triumph of love over deception and misunderstanding. The play's signature mix of comedy and romance is on full display, and the characters emerge as fully realized and memorable figures in Shakespeare's canon. Act 4 of William Shakespeare's play, Much Ado About Nothing, continues the themes of love, deception, and redemption that have been central to the play so far. Here is a summary of Act 4, along with some of its most famous dialogues. The act opens with Leonato, Hero, and Claudio preparing for their wedding day. As they discuss the forthcoming ceremony, Benedick attempts to make amends with Claudio for his previous harsh words. Claudio accepts his apology, and the two men embrace. However, their moment of reconciliation is interrupted by the arrival of Don John's henchmen, Beatrice and Conrad, who have been arrested for their part in the plot to ruin Hero's reputation. Dogberry and Verges, the bumbling constables, are the ones who apprehend them, and their comic antics lead to some of the most memorable lines of the play. For example, when Dogberry says, "We have the receipts of fern seed, we walk invisible." The truth behind the plot against Hero is revealed in a dramatic confrontation between Beatrice and Dogberry. Beatrice confesses to his part in the scheme, and the stage is set for a final confrontation between the play's protagonists and its villains. The act concludes with a series of dramatic revelations and reconciliations. Claudio publicly apologizes to Hero and agrees to marry her, while Leonato demands that Don Pedro avenge his daughter's honor by challenging Don John to a duel. Beatrice and Benedick also declare their love for each other, leading to a touching romantic scene that includes the famous line, when Benedick says, "I will live in thy heart, die in thy lap, and be buried in thy eyes." Overall, Act 4 of Much Ado About Nothing is a pivotal moment in the play's plot, as the various conflicts and misunderstandings are resolved and the characters find happiness and redemption. The play's themes of love, deception, and loyalty are explored in depth, and the comic and romantic elements of the play are intertwined in a masterful display of Shakespearean storytelling. Act 5 of William Shakespeare's play, Much Ado About Nothing, serves as the play's denouement, tying up the remaining loose ends of the plot and bringing the story to a satisfying conclusion. Here is a summary of Act 5, along with some of its most famous dialogues. The act opens with preparations for the wedding of Claudio and Hero. The atmosphere is joyous and festive, and there is a sense of hope and optimism as the play's conflicts have been resolved. However, as the wedding procession begins, Don John's plot to disrupt the wedding is revealed. Beracchio and Conrad are brought forward to testify against Don John, and he is arrested for his role in the plot against Hero. The wedding then proceeds as planned, and Claudio and Hero are married in a ceremony filled with music and celebration. However, as the festivities continue, a new plot twist arises. Beatrice and Benedick are challenged by Claudio and Don Pedro to declare their love publicly. The scene is both romantic and humorous, as Beatrice and Benedick initially struggle to express their feelings, but ultimately declare their love in a heartfelt and passionate exchange. This scene includes the famous line, when Benedick says, "I do love nothing in the world so well as you. Is not that strange?" The play's final scene takes place in the aftermath of the wedding celebrations. Dogberry and Verges continue to provide comic relief, as they struggle to make sense of the day's events. However, the play ends on a note of reconciliation and harmony, as the various characters come together to reflect on the lessons they have learned. The final lines of the play are spoken by Benedick, who observes that the world must be peopled, and that love is the force that makes life worth living. Overall, Act 5 of Much Ado About Nothing serves as a fitting conclusion to the play's story, as the conflicts are resolved and the characters find happiness and love. The play's themes of love, loyalty, and the power of language to deceive and reveal are explored in depth, and the play ends on a hopeful and optimistic note. And that's the summary of Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to English Language and Literature for more literature-related content.